we separate those good works from the work that we actually do. And so we think our business, our work is just a means to an end. So our ministry, our good work is outside of business, or our business funds that good work. I'm making widgets, I'm serving customers, but those things don't actually matter in the long run. What matters is what I could do with that money somewhere else.
We all know that America's cultural landscape seems to be ever shifting, and that can be a little bit unsettling. What we need now more than ever are the transcendent truths of God's Word and some dangerous friends that have our backs. So come join an incredible lineup of speakers, including Pastor Michael Foster, Rosaria Butterfield, Jamie Bambrick, the Blaze TV's own Steve Dace, and many more for Clear Truth Media's 2025 conference, Dangerous Friends. The conference is March 13th and 14th at Redemption Church in Monclova, Ohio, just outside Toledo. I'll be there as well with a podcasting booth, along with some of my friends like Greg Moore of the Dead Men Walking podcast and Parker Brown of the Watch Well podcast. I even heard that the Harbor Freight Doug Wilson himself, Keith Foskey, is also going to be in attendance. So come on by and introduce yourself. Come spend a few days in Ohio with your dangerous friends, and come by my booth and say hello to claim your free civically minded gift. To purchase tickets or for more information, go to dangerousfriends25.com. And be sure to enter the promo code CivEccly25 for $25 off your tickets. I hope to see you there. Well, welcome back to Civically Minded, where I give you practical theology for everyday life. I'm your host, Corey Wing. If you didn't know already, all my interview segments, just like the one you're about to watch, are also reproduced for my audio podcast on Apple and Spotify. Simply search for Civically Minded and catch up on any of the interviews that you may have missed. Well, my guest today is the co-founder and board member of EBM Incorporated, a holding company dedicated to developing businesses that bless people's lives. At EBM, Philip leads efforts in manufacturing, leadership development, managerial training, and fostering company culture. He also hosts Business 300, a podcast offering concise, actionable insights on a variety of topics impacting the world of business, with new episodes released twice weekly. And he's the author of a forthcoming book called The Transcendent Bottom Line. Beyond his professional endeavors, Philip serves as an elder at Trinity Evangel Church in Marysville, Washington, and is a founding board member of Comfort College, a liberal arts higher education program. He's deeply invested in supporting his local community alongside his wife and 3 children. And it is my pleasure to welcome to Civically Minded today, Philip Kuleshov. Well, welcome, Philip. I want to say how nice it is to have you today. And I want to just kind of jump right in, actually. I saw you first when you were on an interview with Gabe Wrench, of course, of Cross Politic, and I was fascinated by the conversation. I know that Gabe's really into the idea of work being a noble thing given by God, even prior to the fall, and that even in the eternal state, we will find ourselves at work. I agree and say yes and amen to all of that. And your take, kind of in return, and some of what you're doing to promote the decency and the godliness of work in and of itself as almost an end into itself. I'd love to hear you unpack some of that and why you think maybe um, a lot of Christians don't see work in the same light.
Living here in such a way that is productive, I think has lost a lot of traction because we see this life, or even the work that we do, the time we spend, as simply a means to an end. And so we live our days with our minds somewhere else. And I think there's a correct way of doing that, where we are to, set our minds on the kingdom of God, set our minds even beyond just this life into how we're going to live in eternity. Christ does talk about that, but it harms it when we stop caring about this life and this work. And so Christians approach work, and even in the context of business, approach it as just a means to an end, and don't really care about the thing itself, only care about it to the extent as what it could give me. And so even our work, when we are saved for good works, using that same word as work, we separate those good works from the work that we actually do. And so we think our business, our work is just a means to an end. So our ministry, our good work is outside of business, or our business funds that good work. I'm making widgets, I'm serving customers, but those things don't actually matter in the long run. What matters is what I could do with that money somewhere else. or maybe I use my work as an opportunity for evangelism or ethics, and that's as far as my good works go. Or I'm trying to cultivate some kind of culture here, some kind of relationship with the people. But we don't actually consider that the work itself that we're doing, building these widgets, building houses, making product, writing books, whatever it is that the work our business does, is good work in and of itself, because it honors God in the way we serve a customer. And so instead of using that customer as a means to an end, we ought to care about serving that customer as an image bearer of God and delivering good value to that customer. And I think it's when we get back to that focus of caring about the customer as a customer in this specific context, not necessarily a customer as a potential convert, right? Or a customer as somebody who can fund my ministry work elsewhere, but care about this customer as somebody who I'm supposed to deliver value to, somebody who I'm supposed to serve, is when we start to actually get to the good work that we ought to do in this context. And so Christians losing that focus and shifting away from that, I think, has created a lot of mediocrity in their endeavor, because they don't actually care about this thing that they're doing. They're just passing time as they're aiming for something else.
Now, there, that was wonderful, and there's a lot to unpack there that I want to kind of explore. So you mentioned, created unto good works. Of course, that's a direct quote from Ephesians 2, verse 10, where it says that we are Christ's workmanship, created unto good works, which He has laid out beforehand, before the foundations of the earth, even. And then one of the verses that first popped into my mind as you were speaking was, whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. And I love the concept of, we hear so much both from well-intentioned Christians on whether it's the progressive side of Christianity or the conservative side of Christianity, love for neighbor, love for neighbor, love for neighbor. That's really been a mantra. You heard it a ton during COVID. You heard, I mean,
Right,
it just
right.
it's been, and sometimes it's used almost as a bludgeon,
Mm-hmm.
but I love the idea that there is a love for neighbor that goes into whatever it is you're doing. Again, whether you're flipping burgers at Wendy's
Right.
or making, metal goods or homes, or, in my context, being a pastor, certainly we seem to think that makes it more noble work.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily, and
Right.
I've never really been one to advance that um, mindset that there's the laity and and then the
Mm-hmm.
professional clergy. I think that's kind of
Right.
a gross thing to begin with. But the idea that you're not using your customers or your clients as a means to a greater end, but that
Mm-hmm.
they are the end, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and I think there's something very noble and even very Christian about having that kind of a view of not just what you do, and that what you do is to honor God. Certainly, again, there's biblical precedent for that, but that what you do in so much as that it touches other people
Right. Right.
should be good.
Well, even that idea of love your neighbor, for sure, 100% agree that that is used bludgeoningly all over the place, even by unbelievers. Trying to convict Christians kind of with their own words. But I think there's a little bit of a sidestep, maybe a misfire when people use love your neighbor as a how as opposed to a what, right? And so again, we can do work, but the love for the neighbor is defined in how we do that work as opposed to the actual work that we're doing. And so we could run a business, we could make widgets, make profit, but that stuff is not loving your neighbor. It's how we do that is loving your neighbor. I think that is a misstep. It's a misfire. I think the actual work that we're doing is the loving our neighbor. Like when we're actually like, so Jesus talks about giving somebody a cup of cold water. It's not how we're bringing that cup of cold water. It's the actual water that we're giving them. That
Yeah.
is how we're loving our neighbor, right? Somebody wants us to build them a house. Us building that house is the love for neighbor. Somebody needs this kind of airplane part to be able to fit it onto their wing, right? We make those parts. This is how we're loving our neighbor. The actual work, the actual thing that we're doing, the what itself is the love. It's not just some kind of Christianized maybe coding that we have to put over our work in order for it to be loving. The actual tangible thing itself is the love demonstrated.
Yeah. And again, I think there's such a disconnect in different fields, different jobs, so where someone maybe in a medical field would
Mhm.
would hear what you just say and go, "Well, yeah, I mean, I kinda get that." Or again, content creation like this, where,
Mhm.
Christian content creation, I'm feeding people's souls, I'm feeding their hearts, again, certainly the clergy, but I love the idea that, no, this is what all Christians do. That
Right.
because we are servants of the Most High, and we do all things primarily, of course, to please him, but in so doing, pleasurable work unto the Lord. We can't help but be culture changers and
Right.
world changers, and so that is a wonderful view of work. And I think that gets to something else you said. You talked about how a lot of companies want to build this culture. Again, that's kind of
Mhm.
a buzzword you hear. I
Right.
was I was telling you
Right.
offline, I spent 20 years in real estate. No matter what real estate company you went to work for, I also worked for a builder. My wife's worked for a couple different builders, and they all have this, quote, company culture, and they all brag about their company culture, and all of this stuff that's usually just rah rah rah. I mean,
Right.
it's
Right.
rarely as substantive as it is, kind of just a lot of hot air.
Correct.
If I'm just being honest.
For sure. Yeah, it gets annoying fast.
It does, and because no one actually sees the leadership
Mhm.
abiding by it either, so the leadership is
Right.
of course usually the corporate cheerleaders, maybe the HR department, but then no one sees those folks living by the quote culture either. So of course,
Right.
the folks down the pecking order kind of go, what buy-in would I possibly have?
Right, right.
But but
Or I think they're, uh, because the business owner, the business leader, um, uh, has a hard time understanding how the work itself that they're doing is loving their neighbor. They try to add some kind of purpose to it that is somewhat tangential but disconnected from that actual work. And so most of the time, that purpose that they try to add to it is serving the employees, the team. And so their mission that they end up developing for their business is this kind of people oriented mission, but it's all internally focused on their own team, right? And so, as if the whole business exists for the employees, the business exists for the customer. It doesn't exist for the employees. Employees are invited on board in order to help serve the customer. And so, I think that's why it gets annoying really fast, because it misses the whole point. We're not here at work to serve ourselves. We're here to serve somebody else. We're here to serve a customer. And so when we try to like make ourselves feel good about it because we're here to serve one another or serve our employees, I think that does happen. And you can't have a a consistent or a business with integrity that is harmful to the employees because they're trying to serve the customer. So for sure, but the service of employees happens even as a byproduct or in connection with serving the customer. Those things are not disconnected. It's not either or. Serving the customer is the mission. It's the whole point. And so I think apart from what you're saying, the leadership not actually living it out. I think when they're making it about the internal team, about the employees, again, it's a misstep to the main purpose of what the business is for. The business is there to serve the customer. So like our at our companies, we talk about blessing people's lives. Our business mission statement is to build up an impact culture. We'd use that culture and the word culture, and it's in one sense intentionally made to be a buzzword to kind of prick people up. But in another sense, we're talking about that outside culture where us as Christians, we're here to build up an impact culture in God's kingdom out there. So we're not talking necessarily about our internal culture inside the company, but we exist to build up an impact culture by developing businesses to bless people's lives. And so when we're inviting employees onto that mission, a lot of the times people have this kind of understanding, oh, great, I want to be blessed. I'm the object of this mission, right? And for them to understand that, well, yes and no, we're inviting you to own this mission, that you are then going to be on mission to bless people's lives. And who is the primary object? That people is the customer. As business owners, our work is to serve that customer. That's how we define productivity. And so again, it's that sort of misstep where we try to make it be inward focused, where I'm serving my employees, my team, and I want people to feel good about it, as opposed to getting people to get outside of themselves and give them a much bigger vision to actually serve somebody else, to build something out there, as opposed to just build something for yourself in here.
That's unbelievably valuable because again, that not only something we've lost in work culture, it's something that we've lost across the board. I mean, it's something that
Right.
we've lost in again, I work full time at a church. It's something we've lost in our churches. It's why churches can't seem to get people to volunteer for the nursery or to
Right.
teach, a children's Sunday school class, or to help with parking cars or what have you, because it's, well, but then I'm going to miss my favorite part of the service, which is, I like the singing, or I
Mhm.
love the preacher. I mean, we came here because the preacher's dynamic, or
Mhm.
yada, fill in the blank with a ton of different
Right.
whatever excuses, and like you said, they've completely missed the point.
Mhm.
You know, when we come to church, it's to worship the Lord, certainly primarily, and to serve the body.
Right.
And yes, you are part of the body, but what anyone who has figured this equation out, on any side of the aisle, again, whether it's in a business application like you or in a ministerial application like myself, um, those of us who kind of go want to shake them and go, you'll never enjoy church, you'll never enjoy work, you'll never enjoy whatever it is you've put your hand to do as
Mhm.
much as you will as when you're pouring yourself out for others to do it.
Right. Right.
There's a law at place, a biblical foundational law of the universe that God's put into place that states, if you pour yourself out in service to God for others, he will then turn around and fill you back up.
Right.
It's just this crazy cosmic thing that he does,
Right.
and it is supernatural. And if
Right.
you've never experienced it, it's very hard to tap someone into that when you go, just trust me.
Right. Right. Well, and Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive,
That's
right?
right. That's
And
right.
so to be on the side of the one giving, and this is why, even like, this is fundamentally why I'm in business, why our business partnership exists, is because we believe that business, in essence, plays this out very well. Just kind of the way a for-profit institution is structured, right? So that concept of more blessed to give than to receive, a business owner does not start as the recipient; he starts as the giver. The entrepreneur takes the risk; he goes first; he initiates. So love your neighbor as yourself, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is a uniquely Christian concept. That sort of golden rule is flipped backwards in other religions where it says, "Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you." But Christianity is on the offensive. It has a pursuit, it has an objective. So it's not to be passive, right? And so business, capitalism, free enterprise is also on the offensive. We don't believe in demand economics. We believe in supply economics, where the supplier goes first. We want to produce. We are to be a productive people. We're not just to consume. And so a business owner is somebody who is living that golden rule out. He is initiating and taking a risk, and maybe his risk is wrong. Maybe he's wrong, and he's going to lose his money, his time, but he does that for the sake of serving that customer, for the sake of serving someone else. So he starts on the giving end. But in that transaction, he receives more blessing as well. And so that sort of profit that he ends up receiving on the back end, or even that promise for profit when he is risking, it stimulates that giving even more. So even in a for-profit endeavor, trying to serve customers in that objective, it keeps that business owner himself accountable. if he's not making a profit, he's not doing a good job serving customers. So it's not people or profit, or people before profit. It's people and profit. Profit comes because you're doing a good job serving your customers, serving those people. And if he's not, he's out of business. So he has to serve people well. And also, profit enables the business to be sustainable. He doesn't have to go around asking for money in order to do good things. Him doing good things is sustaining him to do more good things. And so that way, profit itself enables that entire worldview of the golden rule, and then it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's like a self-fulfilling loop in that way.
Yeah. So you touched on, that we are, of course, capitalists and free market enterprisers. So get in a little bit to some of your history, but not just your personal history, but you've got some pretty interesting familial history that kind of plays into that, because
Right.
you've seen the other side of what, bizarrely enough, so many younger Americans. I'm 40, soon to be 47 next month, and so when I look across my own country, and I especially look at a lot of the younger generation, that's say 10, 15, 20 years younger than me, and I go, I don't recognize.
Mhm.
It's fundamentally different than when I was coming up, and that's not nostalgia saying, "Oh, everything was great when I was coming up." No, we had our problems when I was coming up. I mean, I was part of that latchkey generation, Gen X. I mean, we had our issues, but things have definitely changed even since then, and there's this rising tide of entitlement
Right.
and kind of um, engineered, um, if the government will just take care of me, then I
Right.
can, I mean, so tell us a little bit about your background and your family's background, where you've seen this up close and personal,
Right.
and how they rejected that, and that's certainly played into why and how you function now as a business leader.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you having a hard time pronouncing my last name, I take as a sign of honor. So every time, like, oh yes, I'm reminded of my cultural heritage in that way. Yeah. So I'm Russian, and so my parents, my grandparents, right, all of that were born and raised in the time of the Soviet Union. So my grandparents were born like in the 20s and 30s, so already in the Soviet Union. My parents were born in the 50s on that as well. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed, and then a lot of them fled into America in the early 90s, that's when I was born. So I was born here in America. And so I think my mom was 6 months pregnant when they came over here. But I grew up on those stories of what the atheistic, communistic regime did and attempted to do with the church and with free grace and free thought, right? And so my grandpa spent 12 years of his life in federal prison, in state prison in the Soviet Union for his faith. So he was part of the underground church, resisting Khrushchev, resisting Brezhnev, and all those Soviet leaders. My dad spent 8 months in a institutionalized psych ward to get re-educated because he wouldn't pledge allegiance to the Soviet Union. So a lot of that baggage is there of what it looks like when government hates Christ and actively works to resist him. But how that plays out into the culture, though, is for sure this sense of both entitlement and envy. And so I think where free grace creates a sense of productivity, where people want to be productive because they're working out of a place of what they've been given. A socialistic or communistic background creates, just like you said, that society of entitlement, as if the system owes us something, right? And so even today in America, for sure, we see a lot of this kind of like employee mindset of the system, the business, the government, whatever it is, they owe me my stuff, right? And so when Paul writes to slaves, he tells slaves for them not to have a slave mindset. Even more so, an employee who isn't owned by their employer ought to not have the slave mindset of the system owes me something, but ought to have a productive mindset of me doing my work to be productive. And so for sure that like you see an entire maybe two generations of Russians coming out of that who have a hard time understanding what that productive mindset looks like. But a lot of Christian Russians who then came out of that Soviet Union regime ended up starting a lot of businesses here in America. And so there are a lot of self-employed Slavic people, whether it's like a smaller, productive property business or something that has grown or is growing into something bigger. But it's these Christians who have been held back from living out their faith in the context of productivity, who have been given that opportunity and they are ecstatic about it. They want to run. And so instead of being entitled, they want to be productive. And I think the other part of communism and socialism is that it is based on and cultivates more envy, right? You are envious of what others have. So in the Soviet Union, the biggest propagated enemy were the kulaks, right? So in Russian, a kulak is a fist, and so like literally this means those who are oppressing others with their fist. And so the kulaks sound bad, but most of those people or all of those people were small time property owners. So they'd have like an acre and a cow, and they were the kulaks because they had a cow. Somebody else did not have that cow, and so they would be stripped of their property and sent out somewhere else with nothing. A lot of the times, those people had to restart and did restart, and because of their a productive kind of mindset, where what free grace does, they ended up obtaining property again and would get dekulaked one more time. My dad's grandparents were part of that group, and so instead of envy, I think what the Christian mindset gives you is gratitude. You are grateful for what you have, and then you want to be productive with that as well. So as opposed to entitlement, you have productivity. As opposed to envy, you have gratitude. And so that is what free markets are based on. You start with being grateful for what you've been given, and then you get to work being productive, as opposed to being envious and entitled.
Well, and there's that gratitude that you speak of. It can be rolled back all the way to because I hear all the time, well, but I don't have anything, and you kind of go, but you have opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
You live in a country rife with opportunity.
Right.
So be grateful for that alone. That no one is stopping you from going out and applying for 10 jobs, and
Right.
if you get denied 10 jobs, apply for the 11th. I mean,
Right.
so start viewing your health, the opportunities God places before you, all of these things that so easily are taken for granted.
Right.
And you start just shifting your mindset to a more perfectly stated, a more Christian mindset of, Lord, I have nothing. I live and breathe and find my being in you.
Right.
So if I know that all I have comes from your gracious hand, I mean, of course, James, the brother of Christ, half brother of Christ, says, every good gift and every perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no shifting or shadow of turning. And once you start to understand that and really take it to heart, then it does change how you view things. And part of that entitlement, and again, I've seen it in an increasing way here in my own in
Right.
America. And having grown up, being older than you, having grown up when the USSR was still the biggest specter, the biggest enemy of America. I mean,
Right.
again, I came up in the 80s. I mean, I was in elementary school in the 80s, and we'd still do bomb drills and all these, crazy things. I mean, it was a very real thing for us at that time. And I'm sure it was for those of you on the other side of the world too. I mean, it was equally real for little Russian kids. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my older brother went to college with a Ukrainian guy, and they became very close friends. And of course, back then it was all USSR,
Mm-hmm.
So and they would just sit and tell each other stories, and it was like hearing the reverse side of the same story. I remember my brother saying, "It's wild.
Mhm.
Everything we thought about them, they thought about us, and everything they thought about us, we thought." I mean, just such a bizarre um and antipathy for one another, that was
Right,
sort
right,
of born out of what, I mean,
right.
and so having come up in that era, and then being this age now and seeing in America this not just the entitlement, but absolutely everything you just talked about of redistribution of wealth.
Right.
One of the left's biggest talking points, and I know you're probably not super familiar with what I do here on my channel. I do a lot of political engagement. Yes, I work full time at a church, so it's all from a Christian perspective and all that. But a lot of what I talk about is political engagement, kind of what's going on in our country, and so when you hear primarily the left, but it's not just people with a D by their name. There have been Republicans that have spouted some of this nonsense too. But you hear things like, "Well, we just want them to pay their fair share."
Right. Right.
That these little trigger words, these little linguistic games that they play. When the truth of the matter is, that the vast majority of America's taxation is paid by a very small percentage.
Right.
Just because of the way our tax structure is built. But
But also, I think in the biblical worldview that Christ presents, it's almost like God likes when things are unequal. He likes when things are not fair. So he has structured hierarchy within his creational order. But also when Jesus talks about like the parable of the 10 minas, right? And when the one who just buried it and didn't do anything with it, Jesus said that the master said, "Take that one and give it to the one who has 10.
yeah,
For the one who has more will be given, and the one who has not, even what he doesn't have, will be taken away." Right. So it's that weird even cultural uprootment of what we think is good when we talk about fairness and equality, where Christ presents a whole different kind of worldview. Where no, we're not after equality. We're not after fairness and resources. We're after productivity. The ones who are productive and who get a return on the productivity will be enabled to be more productive, right? And so then that servant who got 10 minas was given authority over 10 cities for him to be productive with those 10 cities. And so again, it's that sort of like self-fulfilling loop where you give and then you get and you're able to give more. And so that society, that culture who aligns with that true worldview is the one who grows up unto blessing, who grows up unto being blessed and then blessing others as well. And so the further we get from that, the more kind of diminishing that opportunity becomes, right? And you were talking about being grateful for the opportunities, and somebody could say, "Well, I don't have any opportunities. Like you have all these opportunities." Well, if opportunity isn't knocking, then build some doors. Like start going out there and build those doors for opportunity to knock on, as opposed to just sitting there complaining and being introspective about how bad my position sucks. Being able to go out there and start initiating, start engaging, to create those situations where certain opportunities will knock that you can then capitalize on. That all it thrives and grows in that kind of Christian worldview, Christianity applied to the work of our hands in what we're actually building and doing.
that's absolutely right. And a lot of what you've been talking about really goes all the way back to creation. It goes back to Genesis chapters 1 and 2. I mean, when we're
Right.
talking dominion or cultural mandate, where God says, "Look, I've made Eden, and it's a paradise," but especially had Genesis 3 not happen the way it did, the goal was go out there and replicate what I've done here.
Right.
Go forth and multiply and subdue the earth,
Mhm.
meaning it had not yet been subdued.
Right.
you know there was a kind of raw or unsubdued nature, and God was saying to his newly formed creation, my expectation is that you go out and bust it, get
Right.
after it. and
Right.
And then when we go to chapter 3 and we see the fall and we see God starting to pronounce judgment on all the creation, of course, it is only then that work is made to be kind of laborious. But
Mhm.
there was work prior. I mean, in chapters 1
Right.
and 2, he clearly says to Adam, you know, your job is to work and keep the garden. So kind of work it, keep it. I believe a better interpretation is maybe protect it. You know,
Mhm.
so do your job, work and tend this garden and keep it and protect it. And so that even prior to sin, because I've even sadly heard pastors mistakenly interpret that passage, and you know, well, then we had to work after the fall, and it's like, wait a
Right.
second, you know,
Right.
no, there was work prior to sin. Is sin corrupted work like it
Mhm.
corrupted everything else? You know, so now it's from the sweat of our brow that
Mhm.
we're gonna have to toil and really scrape to make the vegetation grow, and it's gonna be hard now, you know,
Right.
where our work was going to be just unbelievably fruitful and blessed, and there wouldn't have been this toilless labor to it as much as what we now know. So I love that everything you're saying is such uh, got a Christian worldview incorporated into it that you know it really leads into and this kind of wasn't a question I planned on asking, but just because of I'm so fascinated by kind of your managerial style based on all of the Christian nuance and worldview of it. I can't imagine, and I know some companies do, and if you do, that's certainly okay. But as difficult as it is for most companies to find workers now, to find employees at all, you know, putting some kind of a thing that well, we only hire Christians or something would even then limit you even further. So I don't know if you do that or don't, and that's okay if
Mhm.
you do or if you don't. But if you don't, and I would say kudos if you don't, um, working for a company with this kind of, and I hate to use that word culture again because I agree it gets abused so much, but it's not a bad word. We've just like so many things we've kind of bastardized it.
For sure.
But when say a non-believer would come in and be surrounded by this type of a Christianized work ethic and Christian worldview culture at play, and they're surrounded it day in and day out, I can't help but imagine that's going to be a very, very powerful witness. I mean, sure, you're going to share Christ with them and do all the things because any Christian that is this passionate about some of the more nuanced positions of Christianity is
Mhm.
probably taking seriously things like the Great Commission. So,
Right.
so I say that to your credit, but so you're most likely doing those things already. But the problem with so many Christians that maybe are practicing Great Commission style living is then the world's giant complaint to us as the church is, well, you're a bunch of hypocrites
Right.
because, you know, while Susan witnessed to me at lunch and, you know, certainly is very self-righteous and, you know, looks down on me every time I go to the bar after work or, you know, I slip out for a cigarette or whatever else, or, you know, me and she knows me and George from accounting are sleeping together and she's certainly judgmental about those things, you know,
Right.
but I catch Susan, you know, playing, you know, video games for like 3 hours of her workday every day,
Right. Right.
or, you know, using company resources for her own good and basically stealing. And
Right.
there are sadly the world gets to use that against us because sadly it's true. You
Right.
know, like
Or instead of working, Susan is evangelizing. Right.
yeah, yeah.
So like
As good
this
as
is
that
right.
is. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think maybe half, maybe a little less than half of the people we employ are unbelievers. Um, and so yeah, we employ both believers and unbelievers. We do expect the fundamental um, like decision makers who have to do with the way the business trajectory is going in the long term. We do want them to be believers. We do explicitly build it under the lordship of Christ. So Christ is mentioned, like even in our HR handbook and our employee handbook. We talk about how this business is run on Christian principles. The owners are Christians, and so this worldview is there. But we say that you don't have to be a Christian to work here, and so that part is not a requirement. And I believe that God is able to be honored uh, by the work of unbelievers, even if those unbelievers are not honoring God themselves, right? So God is honored by productive good work, whoever is doing that. The problem with being an unbeliever is that you don't get any credit for honoring God. God just takes that honor because of the way God has designed his glory to be manifest in it. But it's faith that actually pleases God with you. God is pleased with you if you have faith in him, right? But your work, if you're an unbeliever, is still able to honor God. So some kind of oil tycoon who is out for his own greed and riches and is a slave driver, that work that he's doing, pumping oil, still ends up doing a lot of good things down the road, right? And so God is honored in all of that and through all of that, even though if this person is gonna end up being apart from God in eternity, right? But when unbelievers look at Christians, I totally agree with what you're saying. What they see a lot of the time, and it's I think an accurate assessment at this point, is a sort of dualistic lifestyle, a life of faith maybe that is not integrated into every sphere of life, into everything that they're doing, because they either don't understand in their own category, the believer doesn't understand in his own mind what an integrated faith looks like in everything that I'm doing, or that itself they see as a burden that they don't want to live under. Well, if Jesus actually cares about the way I weld this metal, then I have to get good at welding metal, and that's more work. I'd rather just think about Jesus on Sundays and then just like halfway effort my work here and not really care about my competence. Christians talk a lot about, character over competence. Character matters more than competence. Well, if character matters, then competence matters as well. Proverbs talks about how you see a man who is skillful in his work, he will stand before kings. He will not stand for obscure men. Christians talk about influencing, world leaders or having some kind of impact out there. Well, the Bible gives you the way of how to have that impact. Get good at what you do. Care about what you do enough to excel at it, to grow in competence at it, and that in itself will put you before those kings, right? So instead of using the time that you're supposed to be using getting the work done, if you're busy reading your Bible or evangelizing or doing something else, yes, those things are good, but that's not the context for it. That's not when you're supposed to do that. So in integrated faith understands that my entire day and all days of the week are lived under the lordship of Christ. And so it's not that I have to sanctify this day by doing something specifically for Jesus while I'm doing something else, but understanding that this thing itself, when it's done with gratitude and it's done unto the blessing of people, is being done for Jesus in that way. Jesus says, when you gave him a cup of cold water, you gave it to me. So that work itself matters when we're serving that person, where we're doing that work. And so that kind of integrated faith, that holistic Christian worldview applied everywhere, is what unbelievers need to see more Christians practicing. We need to be demonstrating more of that, whether we're business owners or whether we're employees working alongside unbelievers at their level in that way as well. Is what does it look like to actually believe that Jesus is Lord over everything I do?
Yeah, and kind of gets into what some of the early church fathers even talked about, where they would talk about there's this, even back then, that there was this kind of false dichotomy between what in more archaic language would be the sacred and the secular. And
Mhm.
that there were these sacred things, but
Right.
then there were these secular things, and never the two shall meet. And some of the earliest church fathers, Augustine talked about this, and others, where it was like, that's a ludicrous
Right.
concept, because if God created all things and if he is king over all, then that means there's nothing we could put our hands to do that is not involved in honoring Christ. So
Right.
so it's very imperative that we as Christians should be the best employees, the best employers, great citizens. And so that brings me kind of to another topic, especially kind of saying great citizens. You were already in business leadership when COVID hit, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Walk us through what that looked like, especially in a business, because I was still in real estate at that time, and we were we were quote an essential, what by whoever's definition that
Right. Right.
insanity was happening, that we were an essential business, but let me just walk you through what that looked like here for us in North Carolina. At that time, I was working for a builder, so I manned a model home, and so that meant, go sit in a model home, try to sell homes, every day, and all of that stuff. Well, the counties, of course, and the different states all kind of applied those COVID regulations and restrictions differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in one of the earliest counties in the state of North Carolina that went on a full lockdown.
Mm.
So my company was deemed essential,
Mm-hmm.
but customers weren't allowed to come out to the models. So for a year, we went and sat in an empty model, had to lock the door and couldn't let people in because the lockdown orders wouldn't let
Mm-hmm.
that happen. Though we had, it was there was such a cognitive dissonance. And
Right.
okay, so in a manufacturing type application like with what you guys do, what did that look like? How did you guys kind of, navigate those crazy waters?
Right. Right. Yeah. So I don't know if, again, maybe it's from my Russian upbringing, um, kind of this engraved suspicion, at least, or skepticism
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
government.
yeah.
Um, so like almost right away, I called BS on it, that this is something is off, and like doing just a little bit of research, just like even in the first couple of weeks, uh, you could see what happened to like the flu numbers and how that connects to the COVID numbers and all of that. So it was, if you wanted to, you could figure out what was happening early on. It did not need to take even a year for you to figure that out. And so yeah, we did not close down our businesses. We are in Washington State, and so it was difficult.
You had Chaz and Chop to deal with.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yes, that's right. Yeah, but Chaz was essential. That was
So essential people died. I mean, it
that's
was,
right.
yeah, that's
Right. Um, and in one sense, we were blessed. The county we were in, Snohomish County, our sheriff Adam Fortney, kind of from the get go resisted Governor Inslee, where he said, "No, I'm not going to enforce any of this." And the sheriff, I think, was a just sheriffs across America were a crucial lesser magistrate during that time, because they were voted in directly by the people. They are not an appointed official from the governor. And so them being able to act as that lesser magistrate, not being directly under the governor's authority, ended up allowing them to demonstrate courage for other people to see what that courage looks like. But yeah, so we have 3 different manufacturing facilities in the greater Seattle area. We did not close them down. 1 month, our job sites, unless because 2 of our facilities serve as suppliers for construction, um, and certain job sites that are just residential were deemed non-essential, and so they could not continue building. But commercial job sites were essential, so they could continue building.
as were strip clubs and
That's right. And weed shops.
abortion clinics and
Yeah, weed shops in Washington State were
Yep,
essential.
yep.
Yeah. Yes, but so for a few weeks, we ended up having to close our facility because we were not able to go deliver product to the job sites because those job sites were closed. But as soon as they started to open up those job sites, it was like the 3rd week of April. We brought our people back to then do the work. But we did not have any kind of additional requirements for like PPE or safety that we didn't already have apart from that. So we were very familiar with all the masks just because we do like grinding and
Yeah.
dust protection. We know that you are not supposed to use medical masks if it's not a fully sanitary room. Even in a sanitized room, you change out those masks every 20 minutes. Because the whole point of them is to absorb the bacteria from your own mouth. It absorbs it so that you don't contaminate the clean room. It is not does not protect you from the outside at all. And so everything you're breathing into the surgical medical masks, you're just breathing back in. So if you're wearing them for longer than like half an hour, it's already worse for you
Yeah.
for your own health because you're just breathing the bacteria back in. Cloth masks never did anything. So all of our like OSHA, LNI standards.
Bandanas
Oh
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That doesn't even protect you from like dust particles.
Yeah.
Not even talking about pathogens, right? And then the N95 masks, we use those in our welding shops against dust particles. And there's this big label on them that says does not protect against pathogens. That like viral gases. This does not stop anything. It's only dust particles, and even then, so we would grind metal. Back when I started, I was grinding metal. I'd take the mask off, a bunch of metal dust in my nostrils, right? So even dust itself, it doesn't fully
Yeah.
protect you. So when the requirements for masking came out, I think it was like June of 2020 in Washington State. It was like a Washington State mandate that employers needed to supply those masks and enforce mask wearing. We already supplied masks, like N95 masks, so we just continued supplying them. And then I presented to all the employees. We had 3 different facilities, so I walked around the facilities and had a presentation when I read the governor's order, and then I read our response to that order. And in that response, I was quoting a bunch of educational material on training for this mask usage, that these masks do not protect against pathogens. If you're going to wear a surgical mask, you need to wear it in a sterile work environment. It doesn't work if it's not a sterile environment. Cloth masks are not to be used under any circumstance, right? I even had quoted what the U.S. Surgeon General had said at the very beginning to not wear masks, right? And so I gave the governor's order. I gave all of the training for the medical for the masks themselves, and then said that we will not be enforcing any of this. So if you want to wear a mask, you're able to. We're not going to stop you. We're not enforcing any of it. We didn't have any kind of social distancing mandates. Everybody kept working the way they kept working. And so there was a lot of time that I had to spend even like one-on-one with a lot of the employees. People were kind of nervous at first. What this is going to look like. Some people complained about us to the county health district. We got notifications a few times about that we had to respond to, saying that we're not following health orders, that we're going to be fined. We would respond to that, saying that kind of the same presentation that we gave. There was no enforcement on any fees that were threatened. Then a few months later, they would again send something off of a different complaint. That happened 3 or 4 times. So we never actually got fined for anything. They would threaten the fine. We would respond, and that would just close it. And so the view that I was trying to do there is to make a certain haven for our employees against tyranny. So with our church being open during that time as well, and then with our school, our church has a private school. With our school being open, and then with our work being open, all of those places were havens for those people, kind of to be able to come and live their life outside of this tyrannical burden, right? And so I did have people, employees, who actually thanked me for doing that, for providing a sense of normalcy. When they go to the grocery store, is this atmosphere of anxiety and fear and tension. When they come to work, none of that is there, and they feel normal. And so that was an objective that I thank God we were able to make happen for our people, to provide this kind of haven of just normalcy.
Well, again, praise God for the companies, churches, magistrates, like you said, lesser magistrates that were
Right.
brave, that were faithful, and but I do look back now as so often hindsight does give us insight that we don't have in the moment. And I look back now and I think there are things I'm grateful for because it woke a lot of people up. It woke a lot of Christians up. It woke a lot of
For sure.
pastors up. I've kind of said the same thing about the last 4 years of the Biden Harris administration.
Right.
Had we had 8 straight years of Donald Trump, it'd have been more of what we had by the end of his first 4 years, just fighting and I
Right.
mean, not that there's not some of that going on now. I know there is, but people were kind of starting to wane and they didn't really believe in his agenda and he really hadn't had time to figure out who was on his side and who wasn't and who
Right.
was really not part of the problem. And so I again, while the 4 years of Biden were not great, and I'm not going to sit and say they were, because God is so incredible and so sovereign and so gracious,
Right.
he even takes those things and says, I'm going to use them,
Right.
and I'm going to make good out of them.
Right.
And if you'll just look back and be patient, you're going to see my hand at play in all of this stuff.
Right.
And it's really rather incredible. Well, I want to be, like I said, we're coming up on an hour and I want to be respectful of your time. So kind of want to let you close with the other two kind of passion projects, or maybe even touch on three of them that you're involved in. I know that you're involved in this Comfort College, that you guys are really trying to get off the ground there where
Right.
you are locally. I'd like you to touch on that. Then maybe tell our folks about your forthcoming book, and then finish up where you've got your own podcast. I'd love for you to finish up just telling them where they can kind of find you, plug into what you're doing, and if anything that people from all kind of spectrums watch my channel, maybe some Christian business owners have heard this and said, "Man, I want to see what else this guy has to say," and maybe be able to reach out to you and get some
Sure.
wonderful advice from a guy that's doing it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're starting up Comfort College. It's a classical liberal arts college here in Marysville, Washington. And so we're just getting it off the ground, kind of putting the pieces in order. So still very much a fledgling startup, where we're kind of trying to put all the pieces in order, right? And so we're starting with adult classes right now, and so kind of providing supplemental education there. And then as we're kind of working, like I said, putting all the foundational building stones to have a full undergraduate program. So we're not there yet, but that is the work that we're trying to pursue. But yeah, we do have adult classes. That's what we're doing in person here in Marysville, Washington, Comfort College, and it's named Comfort because of the founder of Marysville. His name was James P. Comfort.
Okay.
And he was the original kind of settler. I think in 1865, he came over here and kind of started building relations with the Tulalip tribes. He ended up starting the first post office. He kept appealing to the federal government for a post office out in Marysville. So that's how it then connected. He started the first school. He had the first hotel. And so he was the founder of Marysville. So kind of in honor of the earth that we're living in, we wanted to name it Comfort College for that sake.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. And then what
Your
was the
book.
second?
Yeah, your book.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah. So the Transcendent Bottom Line, the book I'm working on, a lot of what I talked about today is the main thesis of that book is how the Lordship of Christ unfetters our productive work. What Jesus being actually in charge, what that means for business ownership and for productive work. Again, apart from using work as a means to an end, but how the Lordship of Christ actually enables us to care about our work, to grow in our competence. What does business ownership competence look like? So part one is head in the clouds, kind of a lot of that theory, maybe theology, philosophy of what that means. And part two is feet on the ground, kind of actual competence in business ownership. So what is it? How do you serve the customer? How do you build an operation? How do you work for profit? So both of those things together, the transcendent bottom line.
No, that's again, my channel, as you probably heard at the very beginning, my tagline for this channel is practical theology for everyday life. So I mean, you're speaking my language. I love theoretical theology. That's great. I mean, I went to seminary. I mean, I'm a full-time ministerial guy. So, I mean, like all of those guys, we're into that stuff.
Right.
But I realized that for the men that swing a hammer in my church, they don't live in that space. You
Hmm.
know, if I don't take those transcendent 30,000 foot view things and then say, okay, here's how you apply those things,
Right.
you know, to be a better father and to be a better husband, to be a better employer or employee, it's sometimes very difficult for them to you know, read Joel and Amos and, you know, some of the more obscure texts of scripture and kind of go, I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting here, man. You
Right.
know,
Right.
so I love that you're kind of doing both in this forthcoming book and saying, look, I'm gonna show you the why,
Hmm.
and then I'm going to show you the how. And
Right.
because I think there's a real disconnect so often in a lot of Christian philosophy that we
Hmm.
just stay in the why,
Exactly right.
and we don't do a very good job of applying the how. So kudos on that, man. And finally, tell my folks a little bit about this podcast you have, and then
Yeah.
maybe your socials and where they can find you.
Yeah, yeah. So Business 300, that's 300 seconds about business. So every episode is 5 minutes or less. And the idea there is that business people are busy people. There are a lot of, you know, hour, 2 hour, 3 hour long podcasts, a lot of content out there. So adding something else like that is just like another thing in their queue. How can I give them actionable, working guidance in all things business ownership and management? In 5 minutes or less. So I have episodes releasing twice a week. And so it covers kind of all the topics within business management, business ownership. And so these are all things that I would have found very helpful starting off. So I've been in business ownership for 13 to 14 years now. And so a lot of the things that I've picked up and learned from kind of from experience and from a lot of my own mistakes, I'm trying to boil down into like a condensed vitamin that you could just
Yeah.
take quickly and work with that. So that's twice a week, Business 300. It's on the Fight Laugh Feast network. So that's what that is. And yeah, on the socials, you could find me on X, Cool Phil, KULPHIL, and then on Instagram, I think it's Cool Philip there, something like that. Just KUL is my last name. For people who can't pronounce it, there you go.
Kuleshov.
That's right.
Kuleshov.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Philip, for your time today. Thank you for your expertise. This was a very refreshing thing that really does get a little bit outside of the purview of you know what I do. Not that you're the first business owner I've had on. One of my first guests ever when I started the podcast was a small business owner, and so that's something I've been passionate about. But um, I love to hear when Christians are taking quite seriously the mandates given by Christ to do all things well and to do all things to honor him and to bless others. And so, brother, I just want to say thank you for that. And I'll be praying for you. I'll be, you know, observing from afar and certainly wishing you the best. So God bless you, my brother.
Thank you. It's been a delight. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.